the reason maybe the conversation people in this area are more open to, this is my theory, I'm just saying, that are more open to the conversation is that in that sense there's more sort of people of color in this city and they're more open to, they're more comfortable talking about race. Mm-hmm. It's something they're less defensive about. You know, the black experience is not the same as the Latino experience, it's not the same as the Asian experience, but people can, they get it a little more.
Hello, everybody. I think we're going to get started, even though people are still flowing in, which is so exciting to see. My name is Eve Bridberg. I'm the founder and executive director of GrubStreet, and it's my pure delight to welcome you all here tonight. Thank you for putting up with our slightly crazy seating. We weren't quite sure how many people were going to come because it was an event without formal registration. So I'm happy to welcome you here on behalf of GrubStreet and also our co-sponsor, the Literary Cultural District, which is a group dedicated to elevating and celebrating the literary arts in downtown Boston. And it's run by the wonderful writer Alicia Abbott, who's right here in the front row. Wave! And you will see her walking around later, commanding the mic as the conversation progresses. Today, more than ever, we're at the mercy of the news cycle. Shocking headlines occupy us for 24 hours before being replaced by breaking news alerts or hyperbolic hot takes shared among partisans on social media. Everyone with an iPhone is now a potential journalist, able to record and report events as they happen, but often without the ability to offer deeper context, history, or perspective. In this media landscape, well-researched, thoughtfully considered articles are both increasingly rare and increasingly vital. Last year, the Boston Globe Spotlight team spent 6 months digging into one of Boston's most pervasive and troubling issues, the marginalization of the Black community in the city. In their 7-part series, the team exposed the insidious impact of racism on all levels of city life, from housing to healthcare to education. In the months following its publication, there has been an unprecedented and sustained engagement around this series. The Spotlight team has been invited to over 40 forums, which is really remarkable, and I think the size of this crowd speaks to the interest. Companies and organizations are holding internal convenings. People are meeting in their homes, in coffee shops, everywhere to continue the conversation. And more importantly, many people are interpreting this article as a call to action and making plans for new ventures, initiatives in the arts, business, and beyond. This collective response reminds us all of the promise of long-form journalism. It can still rise above the noise, shed light on injustice, and we hope spur change. Tonight, we're delighted to welcome to the stage 3 distinguished members of the Spotlight team who each worked on the Globe series. Since this is a writing conference, after all, we'll be talking about the construction of the series, the writerly choices made, what didn't make it into print, for example, as well as digging into the content of the reporting. Our guide this evening, we're really thrilled to have her here, is Latoyia Edwards, a dynamic and award-winning morning anchor and host of This is New England on NBC10 and NECN. 2 fun facts about Latoyia before I hand things over to her.
Uh-oh.
She's a Dorchester native, and she was also crowned Miss Massachusetts in the USA pageant in 2002. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, what an intro. You told my business, Eve. Hi, everybody. How are you doing this evening? Hey, my people in the back, hello, I see you. Yes. Oh, are you waving like a queen? Yes. We'll talk about that after. So this is a fun forum because it's interactive. We're going to have a conversation, and our panelists really want to hear from you. So we'll do we'll dig a little bit about why they did what they did in this series, but then we're going to turn the microphone over to you because we want to have this be a jump-off point to a really fun and interesting and vibrant conversation. Every opinion is respected, because if we all agree, then there's no growth. And as Eve talked about, I'm a Dorchester native, so I think I was picked because I'm kind of Miss Massachusetts, but literally. I was born in Dorchester, so obviously, and I've stayed here in Massachusetts. I grew up in the Boston public school system, even went to Emerson College, so that touches on the education point. We talk about healthcare in the Spotlight series. I was born at City Hospital, which is now Boston Medical Center. Yes, exactly. And then my mom, she's pretty young. She was on those buses in South Boston during the desegregation, and she would go from Dorchester just 2 miles over to South Boston High School and talk about the fights that she had to deal with. She only lasted 1 year at South Boston High because of that. So I'm well equipped, but I'm also a journalist, so I'm trying to hold in my opinions. I want to hear yours. So let's meet our panelists. We only have about an hour and 15 minutes, so we want to get going. These guys have the most illustrious bios. It's on the GrubStreet website. Check it out online. They told me they just want you to know who they are. So this is Andrew Ryan, and he is, of course, on the Spotlight team. He used to do a lot of City Hall work, digging into the government. His stuff on the Spotlight series about racism is just mind-blowing. Adrian Walker, columnist, joined the team. His unique voice blew me away, especially when talking about sports and the bigot in the stands. And then we have Patty Wynn. She's the editor. She pulls this whole thing together. She's silent and deadly. You want to listen to her? And it makes sense that a woman is sort of being the editor of this team. So let's start right now with the question about why. Really, why? In this day and age, in this time, we knew the Globe had done something, a little survey, and talked about the climate of race maybe 30 years ago, but why now? Why 6 months did you dedicate to this? And Andrew, we'll start with you.
Well, there were a couple of incidents that put kind of Boston back in the headlines for, not so good reasons. And it got us thinking in the newsroom, things happen. There are racist incidents all over the place. I mean, why in Boston does it spawn the headlines? Why in Boston does the reputation seem to persist? And so we decided to try to figure that out, to see if there was a difference, if Boston had a bigger problem with race than other cities, and kind of what the impact of that reputation was. And so that kind of set us off on our journey a little bit. And you mentioned that there was the Globe did a series in 1983 or 4 that was called The Hiring Factor. And it was a significant series, and I think they won a Pulitzer Prize, and they kind of with data proved kind of systemic discrimination in hiring, and so we used that as a little bit of a starting point, and we looked at that data, and then we measured to see how far we'd come, and the truth was we hadn't come very far.
And Adrian, I know you do great columns about this, but why'd you want to jump on this in the Spotlight team?
Because it was a chance to look at it all in a more expansive, more in-depth way. What we were able to do was go look at the issue of race in the city through a bunch of different lenses. Kind of our defining industries like higher education. We looked at medicine, we looked at sports because it's such a big part of the culture here. We looked at political power. So those are things you don't often get the opportunity to do in daily journalism.
Patty, I'm not going to call you Patricia. Patty. Talk about the research, because it's one thing to make the claim about Boston. I mean, you Google it, as Akilah wrote in her piece. She wrote about how, and it was great how she started off. She said, Google most racist city, and guess what pops up? The city of Boston, for good or for bad. And so talk about the research that you use to buttress your statements.
Right. Well, one thing I do want to go back to, and I don't know if for those of you who are from Boston or not, I mean, the two incidents last year that sort of caused us to want to write about it was the New England Patriots were playing the Atlanta Falcons in the Super Bowl in the winter of 2017.
Oh,
right?
we know.
Yeah, right. And so there was this comment that the comedian on Saturday Night Live, Michael Che, made, which is he said just prior to the Super Bowl, well, I can't wait to see the blackest city in America beat the most racist city I've ever been to. And so that prompted a whole bunch of social media reaction, and some people saying he should apologize. How dare he say something that's really so outdated? But then other people saying, no, it's not outdated at all. And that made us really think. And then in the summer, there was that incident in the Red Sox where Alex Jones of the Baltimore Orioles heard the N-word called to him and when he was playing against the Red Sox. And then that prompted a whole wave of national media saying, what is it with Boston? And we realized, like, Boston really has a problem. We also subsequently we hired an organization to conduct a poll where because we were thinking, well, is this outdated? Is everyone just in the media perpetuating this image? And so there was this company that had previously done a poll twice in the last 8 years, and then we had it redone last year, asking basically black people nationally, which cities did they feel were most welcoming to people of color. And among 8 major cities polled, Boston came in last.
As most unwelcoming.
As most
54%.
unwelcoming.
Every time they did it.
Yeah, every time they did it. They did it 3 times in the last 8 years. So we realized that this wasn't just something like, oh, people just remember busing in the 1970s and they just kind of have calcified this outdated view of Boston that the image still held. And so anyway, based on that, we said, well, so why is this? And so we decided that we would really focus not so much on emotion or anecdotes or just asking people, how do you feel? But we were going to look at data. And and we thought that was also the best way for people to kind of get their defenses down about such an emotional topic.
Right.
And so we looked at data. We looked at, okay, say 30 years ago, 5% of blacks in Boston held managerial positions. Is it different? No, it was the same, basically. I mean, it was still below 5%. Has the percentage of, let's say, students at our universities gone up? No, it's the same. There was, back in the 70s, there was this group called the Vault, for some of you who've maybe been here longer, that's like the elite business organization that sort of makes a lot of the big decisions. Now it's called the Competitive Partnership. Anyway, are there more black representation in these elite groups? No, it's the same. So it made us realize that so many things haven't really changed. And then there was the piece, we sort of broke it up into different subjects. So anyway, we just decided that we would, this was an example, even though some people might say, oh, well, certain things on the outside are better. Like they would say, well, in the 70s, a black person couldn't drive through South Boston and feel safe. They would feel that they were in danger. And they would say, well, today, a black person can drive through South Boston and feel fine. But, we were like thinking that's a pretty low bar, if you're considering that to be like signs of progress, right? And so, so even though those outward signs of tolerance or whatever, we were trying to say no, but really you have to look at institutional and structural racism and ways in which this isn't a place where a lot of black people from, let's say, want to move here.
Right.
And so we looked into that.
Okay. So to keep this interactive, raise your hand right now, because one of the statements we looked at, and you talked about that research, raise your hand if you believe Boston is the most racist city in America. You do? Okay, well, listen, I'll pull my Oprah, and I will come out and talk to you. But, or you could come to this microphone right now, and let's talk about why a little bit, because I think we have to dig in. You've done 40 forums. Let's just jump right into why. Alicia, I'm just going to cut into this just to get the energy going just a little bit. Are you willing to share about your opinions? Yeah, let's talk about, okay, sister. And yes.
Well, the first time, is this working?
Yep.
The first time I felt it was when I went to juvenile court in my work as a trauma therapist and trauma advocate, and I saw that all the defendants were black teenagers, and some of the attorneys were black, but most of the attorneys were white, and I felt like I was in Soweto before the end of apartheid. I viscerally felt nauseated by it. It was so frightening and upsetting. In addition, I worked in Dorchester High School, Tech Boston Academy, which is a great school. But when Barack Obama came, they painted only the classrooms that he was coming to visit. They waxed the floors only where he was going to walk. And in the rest of the classrooms, the paint was cracking off the walls and the windows were filthy. And I said, what white suburban person would allow their child to go to a school like this? Like, why do people think this is okay? And I'll just give one more example because I have hundreds and I only want to give one more. I was working with a young woman and I said, oh, she needs a family-based service team. So I called and they said, oh, she doesn't have health insurance. Okay, well, why doesn't she have health insurance? Her mother was arrested, she's incarcerated, and she doesn't have a legal guardian. And I go to the probate court and I said, here's her grandmother, let's make her a legal guardian. They said, oh, that's going to take a month. And I looked at this white clerk and I said, excuse me, but if your daughter had no legal guardian and she could not get health insurance and she could not get health care, is it because she's black that that's okay?
What was the answer?
Everybody working in the clerk's office dropped whatever they had in their hands on the ground, and they just stared at me because I had the balls to do that. But
Did they help you? Did they help her afterwards?
Absolutely.
Well, you can give her an applause for
she
that.
got 1 week. 1 week. So those are just 3 examples, and I deal with these things thousands of times a day. I said I wouldn't tell one more story, but I have to tell this one.
Okay, and that's it.
Just one more.
Right
This is
now.
the last one. Okay, I work at the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute with people who lost loved ones to homicide. I'm the Ghostbuster. They call me when a case is
Okay.
really impossible. These people came in from Pittsfield because they couldn't get help anywhere else. What happened? The sheriff of Pittsfield decided he was going to bring an actively incarcerated inmate to the funeral home where this funeral was happening. The family didn't know. Maybe he was a friend of the daughter who had been murdered. And the sheriff made the entire family leave the funeral home so that this inmate could say goodbye to this friend of his. And when the family said, how can you do this to us? He said, I'm the most powerful law enforcement official in New England. I can do whatever I want. He would not have done that to them if they were white. I know he would not have.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your input. We appreciate that. Andrew, Adrian, and Patty, I know that there were things that made the conversation and made the Spotlight series, but I'm sure there were things that you had to keep out. When she was speaking, did things pop up in your head that you just said, that rang true when I was writing this, that rang true, that rang true?
Well, there were certainly things that we didn't include. I mean, we had a lot of robust discussions about the different focuses that we took, and one thing that she mentioned that we didn't focus on was, criminal justice and law enforcement.
Right.
And we had and the other one that she mentioned that we didn't include was K-12 education. And we had pretty robust discussions about both of those things. And our thinking was that there has been a lot of focus, and there will continue to be a lot of focus on, law enforcement, on the relationship between law enforcement and communities of color. And we wanted to look at some of the things that weren't being focused on. And that doesn't mean that we couldn't have spent time kind of digging into that. And it doesn't mean that we won't in the future. It just, there's also the trick is that not every story can be about everything. So we had to make some choices. But those certainly seemed like places, like there's no question that those are areas that would be worth digging in without question.
Yeah, it's a vast subject, and there are many ways to tell the story of race in Boston and in America, for that matter. So, we had to make some decisions. But there are a couple of things I kind of wish we'd done. I wish we looked at the arts community, to tell you the truth, to see what we would have found. We kicked around doing a story on transportation, which I think would have been good to do. We had 6 months, and we had to figure out what we would and wouldn't do. But, transportation is such a big driver of so many economic things, Like, you got to be able to get to work. You got to be able to get around. And there are big racial issues there. So that's one thing we didn't do that I kind of wish we'd been able to get to.
What about you, Patty?
Oh, boy. As it was a 7-part series, which we rarely do, So from an editor point of view, I'm aware of I guess my point is I don't ultimately actually have regrets that we kept it confined to the certain topics, because I felt like we wanted to do well what we could,
right.
But it gets to be too long. It was tough, and we wanted to leave the 7th day for what we called sort of the solutions day. We offered basically 7 different ideas that we had heard about that could help improve the situation. So we didn't want to leave. So we really did, in my view, we did 6 parts plus the solutions.
We couldn't have done any more than we did.
I know,
to put it in
it was
perspective,
right.
the Globe's last 7-part series took a year and a half.
Right.
Well, you guys are
You know,
overachievers.
so-
That's what's happening right now. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit what you did touch on, and there's so many little juicy tidbits. Does anybody remember the bid for the 2024 Olympic Games that happened in Boston? And what I love about your series is the fact that you started off your power conversation
Yeah.
talking about the Olympics and who was brought into the table to discuss and bring in the possible Olympics coming to Boston. I mean, Boston's a beautiful place. It has, I mean, Dorchester's gorgeous, if I have to just talk about my hometown for a second, but that really wasn't in the mix. Only Franklin Park was in the mix when we were talking about, and there were these movers and these shakers. And again, you folks, jump in if you want to on this, but explain why. And I think Adrian and Andrew, you
And,
guys
yeah,
were both
they did the-
in on this. Who was at the table when we were talking about this? And did any face look like me? That's what I want.
Go for it.
So what we did was we looked at, and we used this as kind of an anecdote to kind of get into the issue, looking at power and, political power, corporate power, and basically, how decisions get made in the town and the region. And so we looked at the early days of the Olympics, kind of before it was public. There was, there were, kind of some meetings that were taking place behind closed doors. And when we looked at, the early incorporation documents for the committee, all of the principals were white. And they represented kind of the different major sectors in town. And what we thought that was an example of, of communities of color and of, the black community being an afterthought. And so we use that as kind of a jumping off point to kind of look at how concentrated power is in Boston and in Massachusetts.
Yeah, it says a lot about who's in the room when major decisions are getting made in this town. We also had a graphic that went with the story of the 50 most important power brokers, which were CEOs, legislative leaders, city council leaders, and there were what, 2 black people?
Yeah. Yes. No, there were none.
There were not. That's right.
There were none. I believe there were none.
Yeah, right.
And what we did for that story was then we used that Olympics example, but we broadened out. We looked, and I'm saying these statistics off the top of my head, so some of them might be a little off, but we looked at, the CEOs of publicly traded companies. I believe out of 200, I believe that there are 2 black CEOs. We looked at, the mayor, for example, the mayor's office. Boston is the only major American city that has only had, other than Indianapolis, that has only had white men serve as mayor.
You should mention the law firms.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah, the 10 biggest law firms had, 8 black partners?
Yeah.
Grand total?
And it wasn't 8%, I believe.
No, 8.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not a percentage, that's a total.
Well, so those stats are there, but, I always look at it and I, as somebody who's from here, what's the why?
So one of the most interesting, and one of the people we quoted, he talked about there being all these, there's a guy who came from New York who was black, and he runs the Biotech Council. And he talked about there being all these kind of hidden rooms in Greater Boston, kind of where power brokers are. And that those rooms tend to be white and male, and they tend to self-replicate. So because power is so concentrated, that it can be hard to kind of break into that, and that those rooms have just, they kind of create themselves. If that makes sense. I don't know. I don't think I'm being all that clear about it.
No. Well, when you mean sort of why is it? Why does Boston have no progress? in
Yeah,
this
I mean,
way?
we look at other places,
Yeah.
and LA, you had a graphic there that said that we had a comparable number of black people to
In
LA. I
LA?
think they were 7%, we're
Right.
6% of the population in Boston. Why does it feel like there's no progress in the leadership here, but other minorities are doing things in like a city like LA and New York? I know there's a higher percentage of black people, but there's a different conversation. Because I know, I'm just talking about the people who are in this room who I'm looking at right now, movers and shakers. My Links organization sisters are here. I know Thaddeus, you're here. I know so many different people who are black people who would support a strong candidate. So what's going on?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I have an exact answer, but I do think that the series, for me anyway, was troubling because you think of Boston as a really progressive place that has a lot of liberal institutions of higher education. It sort of tends to vote Democratic, and yet there's something about the power structure of this place that perpetuates this kind of parochial white leadership, and I think that it continues. I mean, the black population hasn't changed that much either overall. I mean, there's like a 23% in the city, but but in terms of the region, it's still like, what was it now?
6 or 7.
6 or 7%, which is, when you take the greater Boston region, a pretty low number. I will say, though, that we've been surprised, happily surprised, at the reception the series has gotten. And we kept thinking people, I mean, this is a point you've made many times, Adrian, you know, we kept thinking people would be much more defensive. When we wrote this, we thought, oh my gosh, you know, we're going to get attacked and, you know, people are going to hate it because, you know, we were sending a pretty sobering message. But I do think another demographic piece of information, and this has come to me almost after the fact, but, you know, the way in which, I mean, in the last 30 years, the number of Latinos and Asians has grown quite a bit in the city. I mean, we are now a, what do you call, minority-majority city.
I hate that term, but yes, that's
Yes,
what
I
we
know
are.
you hate
Yeah.
that term, right, but what, you know.
Yes.
But in any event, I think that the reason maybe the conversation people in this area are more open to, this is my theory, I'm just saying, that are more open to the conversation is that in that sense, there's more sort of people of color in this city, and they're more open to, they're more comfortable talking about race. It's something they're less defensive about. You know, the black experience is not the same as the Latino experience, it's not the same as the Asian experience, but people can, they get it a little more. And so this is maybe the reason why we've been happily surprised at the number of people who have invited us to speak about it, instead of just saying, you know, sort of throwing stones at the series and going, oh, you're all wrong.
One thing I'll add to that is that another reason I think the reception is different is that this is now a city that's full of people who are from somewhere else. And, you know, there are a lot of people here now who don't have the baggage of busing and having lived through all of that. And, you know, you see it in the city council. When I covered the city council 25 years ago, everybody was from Boston, and virtually everybody was from the neighborhood they represented. And the idea of a city council president from Chicago would have been inconceivable, right? And now it's like no big deal. And I think one of the big demographic changes is just that there's this steady influx of people from somewhere else.
Okay, another, there were so many things we could talk about, but let's talk about the Seaport District for a moment. We are here in the downtown beautiful area of Boston. Not far down the road is the Seaport District. And what's lovely about the Seaport District, it was pitched, and I'm happy you brought this up. It was, Andrew, did you write this? It was you said something like, this was a chance, an opportunity for Boston to literally create a neighborhood that had no touch of anything, no history, because it was an industrial, I mean, wasteland, really, if we want to talk about that. And it was being repurposed. And it could be a neighborhood that had all different neighborhoods, so diverse, all different types of people, affordable income, low housing, all types of housing. And it is not, I mean, raise your hand if you think the Seaport District is a welcoming, diverse community of rich neighborhoods and meaning like all different types of housing. Raise your hand if you think so. Have you ever been clubbing there? It's a little different. So let's talk about what it was pitched to be and what it turned out to be.
Well, so the Seaport, for those of you who don't know it, I mean, it was essentially like, it was railroad yards and clam flats, and so, I mean, it was created, and it had been laying fallow for a long time, and so what we did was we tried to quantify all the investment that taxpayers made, the government made, to basically make it a fertile place for development. And pretty quickly, you got up to $18 billion.
You say million or billion?
Billion with a B. And that included cleaning the harbor, which was obviously significant, but it's all, I mean, it's harborfront, and the harbor's gorgeous now. That included, you know, the tunnel that just runs through that part of the neighborhood. There was a Silver Line bus, which is kind of subway-like and subterranean. There was a kind of a variety of things, but there was tremendous investment. And part of the issue with the Seaport, I think, is that it felt like it took a long time to take off, but once it did, momentum just picked up so quickly. So I don't think there was a great vision. They would have discussions about, design, about height, but they never really talked about who was going to live there, about how it was going to be a neighborhood that would look like the rest of the city.
So, but at the same time, and I know listen, the mayor's going to see this maybe, and he'll say that we have businesses down there like Vertex and GE's down there the headquarters is going to be down there. And that money, that tax, that investment is going to benefit the entire city. It's going to help out schools. It's going to do all these things. So do you see the opposite side, the devil's advocate to this argument of bringing diverse neighborhoods, or no? I mean, because I know the rents are $5,000 a month and $2 million to buy the apartment. I know that side of the story too.
Yes, no, and that's certainly, I mean, Adrian and I actually sat down and had breakfast with the mayor and interviewed him for this story. And that certainly was the argument, that was that, well, you know, the tax benefits from there, the property taxes that are coming in is benefiting the entire city. And, I mean, I guess, yeah, that's certainly a legitimate point. But does that mean that, I mean, I guess it's a balance in its priorities, too. I mean, does that mean, like, I mean, there's a way to collect tax dollars and also create a neighborhood that looks like the rest of the city?
Isn't it a false choice to say that we've either got to have Vertex, either we can have Vertex or we can have diversity? I just can't get my head around this, you know? I mean, we literally built a neighborhood from scratch. I mean, we all remember, it was parking lots 20 years ago. And really, this is what we got?
Patty?
No, I echo everything they're saying, absolutely. I mean, if we're going to just, you know, build the city based on the top corporate dollar, I mean, it does seem that I think the Seaport Day raised a lot of interesting points about what is the vision of the city, what is going to be the dominant factor in describing. I mean, look, the city people pretty much rejected the Olympics, and there was a huge economic argument for the Olympics and what it might do, and they rejected it. It's like, this isn't what we want. I mean, so.
I mean, one of the most kind of interesting statistics that I stumbled across when reporting that story was we looked at mortgages. So, you know, people had bought condos and homes there. And in the last decade, there were 660 mortgages in the Seaport. And this was, the data lagged a little bit, but there were 3 that were bought by people who were black. Not 3%, 3.
Okay, but and I'm happy you brought that up, because I'm looking at folks back here for a second. I feel like we're talking about these issues, but I really want to have a conversation about what we're not talking about. And we're acknowledging that these things happen, and we all have different skin colors, but everybody's afraid to say, well, why in 2018 or 2017 when you did this research is this still going on? What is it about Black people as a community? Are we supporting our candidates? What is it about non-Black people who hear these statistics and shake their head, but what do they do next? There has to be movement. So who's not afraid to stand up right now, and let's talk about this a little bit. Hey, Sister Latoyia, how are you? Come on over to the microphone. You're on the Oprah show. No. Or you're on the Latoyia show, exclamation point, whatever you need to be. Thank you, Sister. Latoyia, let's talk about it.
I want to be on the Latoyia show. I think the thing that we're really not talking about is race, and here's why. We're very comfortable with the same old narrative, and the narrative is white equal affluence and black equals poverty, and that's a problem. The question is, what is going on that Boston is not attracting affluent Black people? What's different about us than LA, Chicago, Atlanta? What is it about this town that we're so comfortable with attracting white, affluent people? Because the people that are moving down to the Seaport, they're not Bostonians, they're coming from other places. Why aren't affluent Black people coming here? What is going on? And how do we have that conversation and get out of this space of Black equal poverty? And so therefore we have to have a rent of $500 or $1,500. And white equal affluence, so you can pay $5,000. The people that are paying $5,000 aren't from Southie. They're not from West Roxbury. They are from outside. So why are we not attracting the same Black people, the same affluent Black people, like we're attracting affluent whites?
But you're not from here.
No.
So why?
So I think there are a lot of things that are going on. We're comfortable with the way that the city looks. We're comfortable with Start Hub looking very white. No, when we look at Start Hub, and everybody can pull out their phones, pull out your phone and take a look at Start Hub. I don't know, how many people know
What
about
is Start Hub?
Start
Just
Hub?
explain it. Yeah.
Who knows about Start Hub? Well, that's a problem. Take out your phone right now and pull up Start Hub. The city has put a lot of time and effort into Start Hub. Pull it up, please do. I don't see enough heads going down.
Sister.
Pull it up.
Go ahead. So just explain.
It's tech, it's white, it's new, it's shiny, it's affluent. Even when it was launched, where were Black people? Where were Latino people in that launch? Where were we? And so therefore, when we have these conversations, we're still putting forth the same narrative. We need to change the narrative. And in changing the narrative, really look at the impact of race, racism, and what are we comfortable with in this city. We all know the number of $8 for Black people, to 250.
The net worth. Yeah.
Right,
Net worth
of net
figure,
worth.
yeah.
Median net
Who's
worth.
going underneath that to say, who are those people? Why did that happen? Is it mortgage lending? What is it? And I think we are comfortable with programs instead of looking underneath this to really look at the economic impact and who receives dollars and who doesn't receive dollars in the city.
I love that. Thank you so much
yeah.
for your input. Yes, sir. Can you? Thank you so much, Alicia.
I'd like to come back to your original question, which was, do we think that Boston is the most racist city? And someone spoke up and said yes. And based on that person's limited experience in Boston, she's carrying this thing that Boston is the most racist city in the country. And that contributes to the image that goes out that Boston is the most racist city. Boston is not the most racist city in the country. There's a whole bunch of racist cities in the country. And Boston may be one of them, but it's not the most racist. Now, you're an example. You said you were born and raised in Boston.
Exactly.
Boston City Hospital, Dorchester. You're a very successful person. There are other people in this room that are also born in Boston that are very successful people. Bostonians look at Boston in a different way than people, Black people, not from Boston, look at Boston.
Great point.
So you got to deal with this racism thing on two different levels. How Bostonians see it, Black Bostonians, and how out-of-towners see it. Now, if you come here to Boston and you move to Framingham or Middlesex, wherever, then you don't contribute as a Black person to anything that goes on in Boston on the real side. Now, you can sit out there and talk about it, but if you're not living in Boston, you don't know it. So when we talk about racism, let's talk about it in two different levels. Let's talk about it, the folks from the outside that got their opinions, and the people that are born and raised in Boston that live here that got their opinions.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Plummer. Alicia?
No, part of what I think is happening is that we don't have a shared understanding of racism and what that means, so people are holding on to their definition. Having only been in this area for 8 years, I can say the kind of racism that I experience in this area is more what we call in the literature the racism without racist, which means, like Vanilla Silva talks about it as having this arsenal of non-racial dynamics that happens, that puts into place, a dynamic and an institution where race, where whites continue to be in power. So it's some of the things that came out and that was discovered in the series. Thank you for your work on that, because I think that's part of what's digging. Power, who's not in the room, and who, what the expectations are. The other thing is that I think about values and people talking about diversity here. Yes, this is probably, and I do this work for a living, I know that this is probably the most liberal and the most friendliest, and the people where I don't experience the kind of overt or covert kind of racism that I would in other countries, but the dynamics that are fueling this in terms of not being able to get people hired, retained, promoted, in those positions is very crazy making. It really is, because I think when people think about diversity here as a value, I don't think it's a value. New England values are very different. Money is for accumulation, flash. If you're too flashy, then that means you have poor breeding. You know, there's a whole New England kind of about waste. You know, all of this that it's how New England, you know, it's just New England that is so different from the other countries. So when I think when you say that people from other countries, or not other countries, other cities come here and look at Boston and say, boy, it's a dynamic here that's happening.
The structural system, the power structure.
Exactly. When I first moved here and my sister came to visit, we were at dinner, she looked around and she said, oh my God, even the help here is white. You know, like, where are we? You know?
Okay, we got lots of folks. Yes, thank you, sir.
Big mistake following Debbie Plummer. I read the Globe article on Seaport, a few months ago, and then a week or two ago read the news from GrubStreet that they're looking at moving to Seaport. And so I have carried with me for the last week or two just a visceral illness over that. And so the elephant in the room for me is, why is GrubStreet moving to the whitest neighborhood in the city?
Eve, you want to jump on that?
All right, the elephant in the room.
Hashtag awkward. Let's go. Yes.
Hashtag awkward. No, it's not awkward. I mean, no, it's a great point. And, you know, it's so funny because entering 2019, and I don't want to take too much time up with this because this is kind of our operational story, but when we entered 2018, I said to everybody on the board and staff, there are two things I know. One is we're going to figure out where to move this year because we're going to be homeless and displaced in the city that has grown so expensive. And the only thing I know about that is that it's not going to be the Seaport. That's all I know. But then, you know, 2 weeks after that, this property came available that's going to be rented. It's 13,000 square feet. It's going to be rented for $1 a year. And so we thought, well, it's kind of malpractice not to go look at that, because the amount of money we're spending for 3,500 square feet in downtown Boston that we could be putting toward programming, scholarships, access would, you know, knock your socks off. So we looked at the property, and it's on the ocean, and we could collaborate with a bookstore, build a coffee shop, have a literary stage. The city, unlike Minneapolis, Chicago, Seattle, does not have any literary venues. There's no place for the literary community to gather and have access to affordable space. So that's why we're doing it. We feel like we can build something really special there, that it's going to be a permanent home for us that will be sustainable. We're not, if we win it, we know there are major obstacles, and our commitment to creating a community that is for and by everyone who is real, and that is not going to change. So we want to be part of the thing that improves the Seaport, if we can. You're shaking your head. Well, can we talk offline about this? Because I don't think this is the best use of this time, but I want to hear from you.
Oh, we have somebody in the back there. Thank you. That will happen.
So I have been in Boston for 8 months. I'm a graduate.
Welcome.
Hi. I'm a graduate student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And just to touch on some of the points as to why affluent Blacks may not want to move or stay in Boston, I'll tell you that I've had 3 very overt racial incidents since I've been in this city.
In 8 months.
In 8 months. Just last week, for the first time in my life, I heard a white person call a black person the N-word right in Harvard Square. There were 2 before that. I had on my book bag, I had my jacket, my book bag on my way to school, and a white man recoiled away from me. And at first I thought, maybe he doesn't want anybody touching him. Let me move away a little bit. But he was recoiling so far away from me, he was leaning on a white woman. Or maybe just being in CVS and being followed around the store as I'm looking at a birthday card, and the woman next to me, who I thought was also looking for a birthday card, was actually the cashier. And there's lots of, so we're talking microaggressions, and then you create a narrative. So when I go back to New York City and someone asks, how was your stay in Boston? These salient experiences stick with me. And so when you hear the narrative, it takes one person to continue that narrative. So I won't be able to focus on all the amazing people that I've met in the amazing places that I've been. I'm going to say, this really terrible thing happened. I heard someone say the N-word. This is a narrative that's created because these experiences are happening. They're real things that are happening in the community.
You wanted to say something? Thank you for offering. Since you're so close, and then we'll come to you.
I just wanted to follow up just because I'm originally from New York City. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and I've lived here now, I think 9 years, the Boston area. I also lived in DC for several years, and it is also the only place I've ever heard, and it was also in Harvard Square, a white person screaming at a black person, calling them the N-word over and over, and I was horrified.
What was the context of that? They just started.
I think they were both drunk, and I think they ran into each other, and the white person just started screaming and using the N-word over and over, and I went home that day, and I said, from New York City, I've never heard that growing up there. I've ever heard a white person screaming at a black person that. I'd never heard that in DC, and I only ever heard that here. And I live in the outer suburbs. I don't live in Boston proper, but the Black Lives Matter sign are in several churches in my neighborhood, which are great, but they've been vandalized so many times. Like one sign at the UU church in my suburban town in Arlington, it was like 5 times it was vandalized. And then when the person was finally caught, and they did like a restorative justice, he got probation and had to do education. Everyone, he was 22 or 23, so many people were angry that he had to do that he should have gotten off because he was so young. And I got suspended from the town listserv just for saying, no, I think he should have to do something. I mean,
You're out of here,
we're living in
say
a
that,
country
yeah.
where people get shot for the color of their skin for doing nothing. I think he could do some probation for vandalizing something several times. But so I just have said, I can't compare it to every other city, but the 2 major other cities I've lived in the Northeast, I've never experienced this before.
Wow, thank you for your input.
I'm going to say one thing about that. This kind of played into the sports story, which dealt with a lot of racist incidents that have happened in the city. And one thing I've kind of come to feel is that white people think they're individual incidents, and black people think, or people of color tend to think they define the city. When Adam Jones gets called the N-word at Fenway and people go crazy, and you turn on EI, everybody says, well, there's one crazy person everywhere. But it's not one crazy person everywhere. And I think one of the questions we need to ask ourselves is why people feel so comfortable here behaving this way, and why it never seems to stop.
We have so many people to get to. This lady right here with the glasses. And as you say, and as you walk over to her, you talked about, and Alicia, I'll let you, as you walk over her, you talked about passion and the explanation for why these incidents happen. I think if you're, whether you're black, white, I'm black, and my husband is black, and he happens to have a big Super Bowl party, and he's so passionate about the Patriots. He looks like he could play for the Patriots. He wants to play for the Patriots. So I think people, black, white, we love our sports. So when you talked about passion, it was tough for me to add 1 + 1 = 2, but that's sort of the explanation that's given. Yeah.
I've lived in D.C., grew up in New York City, lived in Chicago on the South Side, lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, lived in San Francisco. And this is the most racist place I've ever lived. And I have to say, I've lived here since 1993.
Why do you say that?
2 reasons. Well, one, when I moved here from Pittsburgh, the real estate agent, I wanted an integrated neighborhood. I've always lived. I insist on living in an integrated neighborhood. I picked a house on Magazine Street near Central Square. I loved the house. It had Baptist church on the corner, black people living next door. I felt at home. I come from Brooklyn. This was home to me. She said, you don't want to live here. Overtly. Now, I've lived in a lot of cities. She said, you don't want to live here. I'm a professor. She said, do you want to live in Harvard Square? That's where the professors live. And by the way, in my neighborhood, the only professors, now I'm near MIT, I'm near BU, and I'm accessible to Harvard. Okay, the only professor in my neighborhood was David Wilkins, who's black, who teaches at Harvard, who lived there on principle. Then he sold his house to Lonnie Guinier, who lived there on principle. And that was it. There were no white, black, nothing professors in my area, and there still aren't.
Okay. Thank you so much. You know, we have, I want to get to you over here, ma'am, in the green, but then I want to get to my people in the back, because I see you, and thank you for being there. So, Alicia, are you going to, yeah, let's head to the back for a little bit. Let's, you know, I want to turn to our panelists for a second. As you have somebody ready, Alicia? Yeah. Okay.
Are you turning to the panelists now, or should I?
Go ahead, you do it.
Okay, cool. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. A lot of questions have been asked around, you know, why isn't this, you know, changing? Why isn't racism being addressed? And I think these conversations are an important part, because it's these conversations that show us how to reorient our thinking. And recognizing that this is a writing conference, a comment was made that there's a lack of literary spaces in Boston. And as a poet here in the city, I would just like to address that. There is a wealth of literary spaces of young people of color who are challenging these notions in the open mics, in their colleges, in their communities, and they're creating a wealth of spaces. Places like the Cantab Lounge, the Haley House, are putting on Dudley Square Cafe. So if you're looking for diverse spaces with young people who are putting forward ideas to challenge these narratives from their own lived experience, check them out. There's an open mic, there's a conversation through artwork happening every day of the week. You know, so feel free to talk to me afterwards if you want to know where and how those things are happening, because it's vibrant in Boston, and it's something that we can use to catalyze some real change, I believe. So
thank you so much for that. We have some more folks in the back. Let's just move by. Young lady raising her hand in the black shirt. Yes. Ready?
Hi, I'm from Dorchester as well. My whole family is from, my whole father's family is from Dorchester, the Irish part of Dorchester. And I remember growing up, there were no black people in our neighborhood. They were 8 blocks over in the black part of Dorchester, the place we were not allowed to go, and they were not allowed to come over. And I remember this sense of danger. A lot of my family were police officers as well, and anytime we'd drive through the black neighborhood, we'd have to lay on the ground of the car. If we were ever in their cruiser. This was in the 80s. This is just the memories I have.
Yes.
And I've been out of Dorchester and Boston for a long time, recently came back, and I was amazed at what I saw. Amazed that things had not only had things not changed, but that I feel like there's something about that deep-seated segregation in Boston, that enclave mentality that never grew, instead there's been a repopulation almost, like we were saying, about outside people coming in and pushing out certain black communities that I remember before used to be very vibrant. And I don't know too much about what's going on right now, but it feels like that I remember there being such a feeling of danger as a child between neighborhoods. And I was told by my family, it's not a black and white thing, it's a neighborhood thing. If you're not from this neighborhood, you don't belong in this neighborhood. It was the same with Southie, family members I had in Southie, and it was the same with certain black kids that I knew that I was friends with.
So now as you are an adult, how do you process that? Because you're right, those narratives were told to us, because I couldn't go to South Boston even though it was a short walk, and I had a friend who lived over in the projects in Old Colony, and I wanted her to spend the night, and her mother, my dad went in and picked her up.
Yeah.
Her name was Julie. We used to hold hands, and she was in 3rd grade, and he knocked on her door, and her mother said, "Get in here real quick," and said, "Thank God you didn't knock on the wrong door. They hate black people." And I was like, "Oh, okay, well, you know, thank God we didn't." But so you still feel it's the same way now? Because like in my neighborhood on Adams Street, my mom's house, I see Vietnamese, I see, you know, I see Haitian, I see, you know, and that's Dorchester Avenue, you know, that area. So you still feel it's really segregated, and there are parts.
Yeah, I see. There's certain parts that I just see are still so segregated. And I go to other cities. I've lived in Brooklyn. I've lived in LA. I've spent time in Chicago. I've been international. And when I came back recently, I was amazed at how segregated. And I don't know why that shift never happened. I don't know why there wasn't a push for that, and I don't know if it was that Irish control of politics and the housing. I'm amazed at the housing of what's happened with discrimination in housing here. That blows my mind, and I don't know if that's a part of it too. But I think there's when you have that deep enclave segregated image, I can't imagine it's attractive for anybody to walk into this dynamic. And I don't know how that shifts because it's so deeply ingrained in the city. And I think that's what makes Boston so unique from other northern cities, is that that enclave politics and enclave mentality is part of the fabric of this city. It's all about neighborhoods.
Thank you so much for sharing. Let's see. Okay, well, Thaddeus, you wanted to go? You were here before the show even started. They had to move you back. You were fighting for your second row seat. I'll have you jump in.
That's because Adrian said I had to be here. So I think I'll be really quick. 3 things. So I came here in 1985, and I was stationed at Hanscom Air Force Base. In my first briefing, I was told that black people could not go to, black military people could not go to South Boston. We were restricted from going to South Boston. So when blacks came onto the base and said that you couldn't go to South Boston, none of us from here, what do you think the rest of the community and the rest of us thought about South Boston? 2, when I look at this room, I think this is the perfect reason why GrubStreet should be at the Seaport. Because when I'm at the Seaport, even though I'm a GK 100, which means I'm one of the most 100 influential black people in the city of Boston, I still get asked to valet park cars if I'm standing out there waiting for my car, especially if I'm dressed like this. But I also think that when we look at the philanthropic community here and the narrative that they present sometimes to that white leadership that's mostly giving money is from they appeal to their savior point of view versus their believer point of view, which is the example of that this young man talked about earlier. It's not talking from an asset-based approach about what blacks, indigent blacks need. It's not talking about the strength. It's talking about all of those other things that are the negative approaches of what they want to change. And when communities think about crime, when white communities think about crime, they think about building better parks. They think about a lot of different things. And when they think about an urban setting of black people on how to address those particular crime issues.
Thank you so much. Yes, you were right beside. Ashley, I'm sorry, Alicia, right here first, and then we'll go over there.
Thank you. Hi, I'm also originally from Washington, D.C., so I guess there's a lot of D.C. in the house. And I came here in the very early 70s before busing. I couldn't believe Boston either. But I'm going to use a really out-of-date, out-of-fashion term. I'm going to say affirmative action, which does not mean reverse racism, quote unquote. It means that you go beyond the usual suspects. If you are a white person in the room and you have some power, it is up to you to go beyond the usual suspects. So when you're in a room talking about a job, and I've been in this situation, a bunch of white guys from Harvard, Dartmouth, and Yale, and they were all, and me, and they're all talking about a little job they had. And what they said among one another was, hey, what's your daughter doing? Oh, I don't know, what's your daughter doing? It never occurred to them to think of someone outside of the room. So if you are a person and you have access to money, to power, to influence, please do not be afraid of the pushback that you are going to get from other people. Be brave and go beyond the usual suspects.
Nice. We're going to get to more people. We have about 14 minutes left, but I just want to bring the panelists, because that was a great entree into solution-based. You said your last piece of that series, Patty, was about talking about solutions. Can you briefly, each of you, touch on that?
Well, in the solutions piece, it was really far-ranging. I mean, it was everything from change the city charter to give more power to the city council as opposed to the very strong mayoral form of government. So then would be more inclusive of power. So it was everything from very macro solutions like that to metrics matter, where holding companies accountable in hiring, reaching outside your networks to echo what the last speaker just talked about. But we also had in there, because we wanted people to feel that they could make a difference, not just like you have to hold some official position or you have to be in government. We talked about sort of, maybe some of you have heard about these sort of courageous conversations type of programs where we were saying that everybody, in a sense, has agency. Everyone can do something. Whether it's where you work, your neighborhood, whatever you do to do outreach, or even talking about going beyond the usual suspects, and even just what you do in your church, your community group, your religious organizations, and we wanted to make sure that there were a range of things. There isn't like one solution per se. It's too complex to just have one solution.
Adrian?
Oh, I think Patty kind of said it.
Okay.
And I can expand on a little bit of the kind of looking outside your network. One of the most concrete things that we pointed to was the thing in the Seaport, actually, with that Massport, the Port Authority, which owns a lot of land in the Seaport, that they implemented a new rule, essentially, was with the way that they put project out to bid. And they made diversity count for 25% of the project. And so they didn't basically said they didn't set quotas and said you had to hire X number of people, or companies run by X number of people. They instead just said diversity counts for 25%, figure it out. And so what that did was that forced people to look outside their networks.
Right.
And that created partnerships of companies that weren't partners before. And that had a significant impact, because not only did it happen on one project, this big hotel project, but then there were other projects that spawned off of that, because it put people who might not usually work together. And that's one of the ways, and that can be kind of replicated in ways large and small, but it's all that idea of exactly like the speaker was saying, to look beyond your network or the usual suspects.
Yeah, one of the things we wrote about in the last day was the Globe itself, and sort of the makeup of the newsroom and the management of the newsroom. And one of the things Globe management committed to in response was, instituting a policy where every time there's a hire, there will be people of color, in the applicant pool, which has not been the policy before. So hopefully that will help increase diversity in our newsroom.
We wanted to make sure we get to this, and if you could keep it brief. And we're going to continue the conversation in outside too, because I know there are a lot of folks who wanted to get to some things. We want to ask you, as you wrote the 7-part series, personally, you may have gone into it with a certain viewpoint about a topic. What changed? What hit you? What hit your gut? What you took away from that may have been different completely than what you started out with? Andrew, you can start.
One of the interesting exercises we did was we counted a lot. We counted public spaces. So we went, everywhere from Fenway Park to Gillette Stadium to restaurants to public parks. And it kind of really opens up your eyes when you count. And I find myself still kind of counting, because sometimes...
Like physically one
counting.
person?
Yes. Like I actually had an app on my phone. It was like a tally thing.
Yeah, Andrew and I stood at the turnstile at Fenway, all of us did actually one day, and just counted the number of black people who came in.
Well, actually...
Where'd it go? How high?
It
was 3%?
Something like that.
Yeah.
We actually did the Bruins as well, which was lower.
Which was
1%? Point?
Yeah.
But my memory was it was higher than we thought.
It was higher than we thought, which was 0.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so you have to set your own expectations. But and really counting, it forces you to kind of just be conscious, and just be conscious of the kind of the public spaces you're inhabiting. And there were some places, like actually this is another Seaport place, but the Lawn on D, Adrian and I did as well, and that was actually much more diverse than we thought. And we thought it was we didn't think that, and it was, we were surprised.
Yeah, it was an interesting way to kind of get at why a city with such a big population of people of color often feels so segregated, It's like you walk around, if you walk down Newberry Street on a Saturday afternoon, you wouldn't think there were 100 black people in Boston, And it's kind of like, what is that about? But to answer your question about surprise, I think what surprised me, to be honest, is everything was a bit worse than I thought it would be.
Really?
Yeah.
Patty?
Well, I mean, because this is a group of writers, I'll just share something that surprised me. This is a very different thing, but it has to do with words. Whenever you have a series like this, the top editors, whatever, you always have like a 2 or 3 word like label for the series, right? That catches, it's like the icon and then a few words that will go with each of the days. And in the beginning, someone said, so we were debating this. This was a huge debate. And so one of the times, someone said, well, let's just call it like, is Boston racist? They'll just put that question out there. But then some people said, no, let's not do that because that's such a binary thing. Be like, so, and we thought a lot of black people would say yes, and a lot of white people would say no. And so it's like just too much of just a question. And then one editor came up with this idea which the reaction to it really surprised me. So he said, what about we call it Boston's Black Eye? And I remembered initially when I heard it, I was like, oh, whoa, there's like the pun maybe on the word black eye. I thought, actually, the kind of issues we were talking about was structural and institutional racism, so we're not talking, a black eye suggests kind of violence, and that actually isn't, at least in Boston, really the main, kind of imagery. But interestingly, I was surprised that when I spoke to a number of black people who I trust and in the newsroom and even on our team, they liked it. I was shocked that they liked that label because they thought it was like, whoa, that's like really in your face. That's like really powerful. It was vivid. And I was kind of just like thinking, oh, people, but I was surprised that a lot of people I trusted who I think are very nuanced about words and language and all that really liked it. And it surprised me because it made me realize how powerful this subject is for a lot of black people in Boston, and that they would want that kind of super powerful, potent image to be the name. In the end of the day, as you know, we didn't do that, and we ended up calling it Boston, period, racism, period, image, period, reality. We chose something that we thought was a little, but I was just surprised by just all the issues that came out.
And why did you ultimately not go with Boston Black Eye?
Because, I have to say, I personally ended up feeling that, I wasn't alone in this, but that, you want to be provocative, and I think that's good, and as all of you as writers, you can understand how it's good to be provocative, but I was afraid it would become, early on, too much of a distraction. And not get us, like, I didn't want the label to be such a thing and that we wouldn't be able to get into the substance of what we wrote about. But again, I will tell you that sometimes, some people would say, oh, we wimped out. But anyway.
Well, let's end it like this. And we're going to take our conversation into the hall right here. But I always like, when I do different interviews, I always like to do word association. So, and just what comes to your mind. I know it sounds strange, and especially such a heavy topic, but let's end it like this. When you think, and you just tell me the first thing that comes to your head. When I say Boston and racism, you say, you think, Andrew, you're up.
I'm up.
What you heard, don't filter.
I was going to say complicated and then long-standing were the first two things that came in.
Perfect. Adrian, Boston racism.
Long-standing and true.
Patty, Boston racism.
A real thing.
I think there's room for another series. I think it's time for part 2. Thank you so much, Andrew, Adrian, and Patty, for your expertise, your bravery. Thank you for your conversation. Until next time, thank you for having me. I'm Latoyia Edwards. We'll continue in the hallway.